today we are going to be watching a video by Mujy about if Fortnite chapters are too short. If you guys weren't around in the early days, both chapter 1 and 2 were 2 years long, and then recent chapters have been a year long each. And based on the leaked roadmap we have seen, it seems like chapter 5 is also going to be a year-long chapter. And we're about halfway through with it, which is why I wanted to kind of watch this video and talk about how things have been, because I feel like a lot of you wouldn't even think that we're basically already halfway through chapter 5. Mujy's channel will be linked down in the description below. His videos are really good, and if you guys enjoy this, give it a like, subscribe, check him out, and let me know what you think of Fortnite chapter length, because my opinion on this has actually changed quite a bit. When chapter 3 and 4 were year-long each, I was actually very happy about that. When I quit in chapter 2, a lot of it had to do with not liking that map that much, and so yearly refreshes on a map I thought was a very good thing. And I still do like yearly chapters, I think, but I have started to see some of the downsides that I'm sure he'll talk about during the video.
Fortnite's live service model creates interesting avenues that can be explored when approaching change, but by far the game's most unique updates are new chapters. New chapters seek to evolve Fortnite by introducing brand new mechanics, weapons, forms of transportation, and of course a brand new battle royale island. However, over time, Epic has altered the length of chapters, decreasing them from 2 years to 1, creating many mixed perspectives on what form factor is ultimately the better approach. Now, what will likely come as a surprise to some of you is I actually don't take much issue with year-long chapters.
Wow.
But there
Just a quick comment. Do you prefer 1 year-long chapters, or would you rather have it be longer?
are many good arguments that counter my preference, and just because I view year-long chapters as not being entirely negative, doesn't mean that it's inherently better than the prior 2-year length. Really, the question, are Fortnite chapters too short, can be answered by understanding why Epic deviated from longer chapters in the first place. When discussing 2-year chapters, I think it's important to understand why it works so well for chapter 1 and not so well for chapter 2. When Fortnite's battle royale was initially
The delays. So, chapter 2, season 1 and 2 were both 120 plus days long each. Chapter 2, season 1 got no updates really. Chapter 2, season 2 got a decent amount, but once the delays started, it didn't get any. And that just killed any momentum the game had, I feel like.
released, it was very much so a rush.
Chapter 1 was constant updates, constant momentum, 70-day long seasons-ish. Some were a little longer, but mostly 10 weeks each. Like, the flow was just great. And chapter 1 was new and fresh, and everyone was kind of learning and getting used to the game as it went on, and so people's expectations were lower.
Beta experience. This was very evident for those who had already experienced Fortnite prior to its battle royale through Save the World. Many of the assets, models, and even weapons were completely copied and pasted into the battle royale mode from the Save the World playlist. As a result, much of the early gameplay was rather buggy, which didn't stop it from becoming a massive game.
And that hasn't stopped.
Due to the unique experience it offered, but it did mean that if they wanted to retain their player base, they would have to use the following months and
Oh my god, this was so annoying. So this bug still happens sometimes.
But it did mean that if they wanted to retain their player base,
if there was something intersecting with your builds, you just couldn't place the build. Like here, he has all the mats in the world, but he can't build. And that was so tilting to experience. And they've improved this, but still there will be times, especially when new POIs come out, where there's just like random places you can't build.
They would have to use the following months and seasons to play catch up with their game.
Are you kidding me? I couldn't build because of this stupid fucking crate, dude? The metal crate, are you kidding me?
Many bug fixes, weapon nerfs, and quality of life changes were added in an effort to make the game feel more polished compared to the beta experience that it launched in. While there were certainly map changes that were quite significant, like the early addition of Tilted Towers as well as a plethora of other POIs, these locations really only served the purpose of filling in awkwardly vacant areas around the map. So by the time Season 4 came around, Epic was ready to tackle their first story-driven change to the map with the inclusion of Dusty Divots. From that season on, Epic created an ever-evolving map that is forever impactful.
That's actually a very good point. So I think basically what he's saying was it was much easier to make map changes that would satisfy the community in Chapter 1 because the launch Chapter 1 map was incredibly basic. I wish he had a picture of it on screen now. I'll try to do so in my post-editing. Thank you for the sub, Void. The launch version of the map was very basic. They ended up adding Tilted December of 2017, so it was only like this basic for a short time. But it's easier to improve on something that isn't complete. But when they come out with a new chapter map now, it's mostly complete, so it's like harder for them to make changes, I guess. Is what he's gonna what he's getting at.
In Fortnite, and the game saw a very positive reception because of it. So if this 2-year approach works so positively for Chapter,
it didn't. So Chapter 1 is remembered more fondly than Chapter 2, but this is the Season 9 trailer. By Season 9 onward, maybe even Season 8, people wanted a new map, especially when Apex ended up getting its second map before Fortnite did, and Apex came out in like Season 7 of Fortnite. People very much wanted a new map and would like hate on Epic for being lazy and only giving us map changes. Again, there's kind of revisionist history there where people act like the Chapter 1 map was like amazing. I enjoyed it. I loved that time, but like people were thirsty for a new map like towards the tail end of Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. Why did it suffer with Chapter 2? Well, I mentioned that Chapter 1 started off as a beta experience, and much of the early updates with the game were solely focused on polishing aspects of the game that otherwise wouldn't have been an issue for the mode if it was given more time to fully bake in the oven.
100%.
Instead of Seasons 1
it felt like you were playing the game as it was being developed. And today, if that was the quality, it's like standard quality, people would be upset. Also, not only was the game changing so much in terms of updates, but also the player base was as well. Like, the game was, like, developing over time, but also the player base was. So even if there weren't massive changes with the map, the way people played changed so much. And once we're 6 years into the game, there's just, like, less room for, like, player innovation like that. And because there was so much player innovation, I feel like that kind of, like, made the game not get stale or people didn't get burnt out as much.
through 3 being story-driven like the rest of the chapter, they featured no change to the map apart from filling in vacancies to increase the density of POIs, which is closer to the norm for a map's first season. Unfortunately, Chapter 2 didn't need this grace period to adjust for bugs, and considering the weapon pool featured mainly returning weapons, it depleted the necessity for creating balance updates across the early seasons. Chapter 1 only had 5 to 6 seasons worth of story-driven map changes, so naturally Chapter 2 was given a much more demanding task because it now had to create map changes for each seasons. It doesn't help that the standard of changes to the map each season that Epic had built up to were massive reworks to areas of the island, at times taking up almost a quarter of the existing map. Now, despite these intense requirements for their
What I didn't like about the Chapter 2 map changes is a lot of it would kind of just rinse and replace the same areas. I quit playing Chapter 2 Season 3 at the very start of it. I came back Chapter 2 Season 8 in the final month, which that's like a 1.5 year time period. I was still landing at all of the same POIs as when I quit. The Displaced Agency, this was the middle of the map, and this was the spot they would change like every season. It became the Authority, and then it was like a sandy Coliseum, I think, and then eventually like the cube pyramid by the time I came back, and I don't know what it was in the meantime, but like a lot of the exterior POIs just stayed completely the same.
map updates, Season 2 started off in a very positive direction. The introduction of the new 5 POIs didn't take up a massive amount of space, leaving room for future seasons to rework different portions of the island, and they all served as strong locations that were worth landing.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. We had Fring. We had a lab. We had everything.
I feel Mike here, by the way. Mike was like my favorite character in Breaking Bad.
We needed.
Everyone is
all
just
ran
griefing,
like
bro.
clockwork. You could have shut your mouth, cooked, and made as much money as you ever needed. It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up. You.
Dude, that is the same spot on the map.
It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up.
This was the Authority, I think, or was this during Stark season? I think it's the Authority. That's like that's one of the logos. Yeah, but anyways, they would just change this middle map area each time, it felt like.
You.
This cube pyramid thing was also that same spot on the map.
Pride in your ego.
Unfortunately, for one reason or another, the direction that the rest of the chapter took with change didn't embody what people loved so much.
And so like there were map changes, but the map changes didn't freshen up the map that much because everything else was still the same. Whereas like Chapter 1 would replace chunks, you know, they took out Greasy for the ice area, they took out Wailing Woods for the jungle area, they took out Moisty for the desert. Like the map changed over time, like huge sections of it.
Much about Chapter 1. The map experienced practically no change over the course of 8 seasons. Sure, most of these maps in isolation look pretty good, but when actually given the context of what came before, it's just rather...
Look. These were the POI Season 1?
Maps in isolation look pretty good, but when actually...
This was Season 7. This is like 2 years after. Or like a 1.5 years, I guess. A lot of the same. Corny Complex, I think, was a very similar layout to fencing. They just kind of changed the name. Holly Hedges became Holly Hatchery, but it was still basically the same layout. Like, a lot of the same spots.
Given the context of what came before, it's just rather disappointing. But even if Epic chose not to replace locations from prior seasons, it still would have been rather difficult to create 8 seasons worth of map changes that people enjoy. Even Chapter 1 struggled with this.
100%. People are always going to be upset when their POI leaves. But, and I was like that too. Like I said, Greasy got removed for the ice area. In Chapter 1, Season 7, I was so butthurt when that happened, bro. I was heated. But after playing during Chapter 2 with the lack of map changes, I would rather have changes that, like, sure, some spots I don't like, or spots I like get removed. I would rather have that than no change at all. Chapter 4, Season 1, Faulty Splits, my favorite POI, got removed after 1 season. Chapter 4, Season 2 is still my favorite season of that chapter. Seems like fencing is going to get removed in the next season of Chapter 5. I'm okay with that, even though it's one of my favorite POIs, because I would rather have, like, the risk of having some spots I like change than have no change at all.
Because by the time Season 9 had come around, the map was already perfect, and the revamp of Tilted to Neo-Tilted wasn't a replacement that most of the community was on board with.
People hated it.
In addition, Season X itself had very little map changes that players didn't find bad, or at the very least obnoxious.
Fucking taco time!
So
That's Mongrel. The Season X changes, they brought back a lot of spots people liked. It was like kind of the encore of Chapter 1, but they made each spot have a stupid effect. So this POI was prop hunt. Anytime you crouched, you turned into a prop. Watch the people.
Find bad, or at the
you
very
couldn't
least
crouch in this
obnoxious.
POI. You just become a grill, bro. Look at
Had
this.
very little map changes that players didn't find bad, or at the
Dust Bunny
very least
95 is gonna become a grill.
obnoxious.
GG's. And so you would get someone weak, they would just become a like teapot and run away or something. Like, it was so triggering. And I feel like this would have been a very cool POI because it was like a mix of old and new, but the Rift effect just ruined it.
Taco time!
So if
Greasy Grove, like I said, I was sad when that POI left. It had taco time where periodically everybody in the POI would just get boogie bombed at the same time and their HP would regen. So they like brought back one of my favorite spots and ruined
you
it.
take into account the number of seasons that were positively received on the map development side, and the fact that the early seasons didn't contribute much to the overall evolution of the island, there were really only around 5 seasons that exist within this healthy progression criteria.
I agree with him. So basically what he's saying was map changes didn't start until Chapter 1, Season 4. I very much agree with that. That is when the meteors collided with the map and hit Dusty Depot and created Dusty Divot. The only map change during Season 3 that I remember was this area, Lucky Landing, got added during like Chinese New Year. But it was like very minor. Season 5, desert biome. Season 6, cube areas on the map. Not as much map change, but we had cube areas on the map, and then like the floating island would rotate to each of them. Season 7, ice biome, or ice biome is Season 7 right here. He has them in like a weird order. And then Season 8 was volcano biome. You see, each season was something different changed and replaced what was there previously. And last season's map changes, for the most part, stuck around from season to season.
Really only around 5 seasons that exist within this healthy progression criteria. I'm not saying evolving a map in a healthy way over the course of 2 years is impossible, but given the high standards that each season is meant to reach for the map development, it wouldn't surprise me if they were keeping chapters shorter to atone for these issues. Going back to
Okay, so I think what he's getting at is like there was only 5 seasons of good map development in Chapter 1, and if you expect good map development season to season from the get-go, there's only about 4 or 5 seasons of that can really happen, I guess. I disagree that it needs to be that way, but like I see what he's saying with like the comparison of how much seasons in Chapter 1 actually got map development compared to now where we get 4 seasons a chapter, but each of them is like significant map development for the most part.
The map's lack of evolution, this likely may have been a reason for introducing locations that overlap or remove prior ones. Obviously, I'm not trying to absolve the criticism that is made towards the map's lack of progression, but there likely were some cases where the removal of POIs was just inevitable. However, despite the mess present with Chapter 2's map, if anything, the Chapter 3 island's issues reflect my concerns towards longer chapters. Chapter 2 left many players jaded towards Fortnite's island as a whole. After essentially playing on slightly altered versions of the Season 1 map for 2 years, people were looking for more colorful and exciting locations to explore. This meant Epic was going to have to step it up quite a bit in the map development department if they wanted to keep people on board, and at the time, their map did just that. The Chapter 3 Season
Chapter 3 map was solid. I liked Joneses. I liked Greasy. Shifty. Coney was okay. I didn't like Rocky Reels. Rocky Reels was like the hot POI of that map, but I've just never really enjoyed like risky Rocky Reels. They're the same POI basically. Camp Cuddle was where I landed for Arena that season. It was solid, but I didn't really land there in pubs too much. I didn't like Daily Bugle as much as other people. Sleepy Sound I never went to. Condo Canyon and Chonker Speedway I never really went to or gave a chance.
1 map featured 3 unique biomes ranging from desert, snowy, and jungle, along with
Personally, I don't care very much about biomes. Like a big criticism of Chapter 2 was that it was just all grasslands. I like when a new biome gets added like season to season, but if it's just all grasslands, it doesn't really bother me either. I feel like a lot of times different biomes kind of grief the game because they like these snow areas. Think of the snow mountains in the Chapter 5 map. I feel like they made those mountains annoying just so the biome feels different. You know? Like, I feel like trying to make the biome feel too different can kind of, like, make gameplay worse at times.
Season 1 map featured 3 unique biomes ranging from desert, snowy, and jungle, along with a multitude of returning locations from the Chapter 1 island. The problem is the Chapter 3 map was a bit too well developed for its first season. Ultimately, despite its praise, the OG island started off very uninteresting and
okay, here's a picture. I'll just have it in editing later.
Ultimately, despite its praise, the OG
island
started off very uninteresting and lacking in the loot department. This amplified future seasons quite a bit, as it gave them a significant amount of room to improve. However, by the time Chapter 3's map was released, it already worked quite well, essentially making it more difficult to introduce meaningful map changes later on.
Okay, so our standards are so much higher for maps now. If a new chapter map launched in the state that launched Chapter 1 map was, I agree no one would have been accepting that. And so they have to make a good, high-quality map from the start, and then also make significant changes every season.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
This doesn't mean that the map shouldn't be well constructed for its early seasons, but there should be some room to
think about, and like the launch of a chapter is so important too for like perception of the game. If a map launched bare bones and basic and it was just bad, and the idea was it'll get better over time because there's new seasons, a lot of people are going to be checked out by the time those new seasons come.
Improve or add interesting land masses that don't have to replace stronger pre-existing locations. Unfortunately for Chapter 3's map, it peaked towards the end of Season 1 after the mid-season updates, and past that point really only regressed as a result.
Did it peak in Season 1? Season 2 added like the blimps. Season 3 added the reality biome. I guess it did, yeah. Season 4 map changes were not my favorite.
Of a lack of necessary change. I'm well aware that the true reason for Chapter 3's abrupt cutoff had more to do with Epic's intention of promoting the new Unreal Engine, and not an issue with introducing unique map changes, but since meeting the criteria of map changes each season can be rather difficult, it wouldn't surprise me if they took this into account when making the more permanent switch to year-long chapters. As it stands, it fits their high-quantity model for content, and it allows Epic to create potentially larger map changes in their updates, without having to worry about later seasons not being given as much room to improve, because there are now significantly less seasons in a chapter they have to account for. It also helps when you consider that Fortnite is a game that is constantly trying to grab your attention and bring you back in one way or another. Having a higher frequency of chapters is likely one of the reasons I have stuck around, as it keeps the game more fresh when compared to the longer chapters that—
I completely agree. I played COD for years. There's a thing called the COD cycle. I'll have it on screen now. Every year, there's people that quit the game in the summer and then come back in November to see what the new COD is. And I feel like Fortnite is kind of establishing that with yearly chapters. And I feel like chapters are kind of natural points for people to like kind of get back into the game and give it a chance. In the same way that a new COD release would be for COD. I completely agree with that.
Sometimes drag on. However, despite the many benefits that come with a one-year form factor for chapters, there are still some aspects that we have since lost as a result of this alteration, and furthermore some negatives that come with it.
I don't know what the negatives are. People will say the storyline. One kind of like the storyline has gone downhill in recent years, and people equated that to the yearly chapters. But Donald Mustard kind of came out in an interview a few weeks ago and said it was because of the multiverse and all the Lego modes that like the live events weren't getting as much attention and that the storyline wasn't getting as much attention. Chapter 5 has done a really good job on the mini event front in terms of like developing how the map changes season to season and explaining that and building some hype. We had like the Titan hand in season 1, and then now we've had like the Titan hand getting struck by lightning and stuff. But I think they've done a good job with that. I think the fact that people would say the storyline sucking is why year-long chapters is bad. I don't think that's a good point anymore. It can be. There's less time to develop, but like I think it was more the multiverse. Another thing people will say is the seasonal events aren't as good. And I don't know why the seasonal events have to be bad if the chapters are only 1 year long, but that's something that people have said. The seasonal events like Winterfest and the summer event haven't been great, but there's also been events that have been very good, like the mini pass events. I just think they put less effort into them. I think if they really wanted to have good seasonal events with the yearly chapters, they could, but for some reason they're not.
It's unfortunate because regardless of the many flaws that are difficult to avoid,
Multiverse thing could maybe play into that as well.
Choosing the 2-year approach, I don't really believe that we've seen a chapter that has properly executed the concept of a longer form factor. I think what could have been interesting is what I believe they were attempting with the launch of Chapter 2, and that's a complete pendulum shift with the nature of content. If every chapter started off basic and bare bones, but slowly built itself up over the span of 2 years to the level of chaoticness that was featured with season...
Launch of Chapter 2 is supposed to be like a 40 day long season, I think, and it turned out to be 128 days with no updates. So I agree, if they wanted to do basic season 1 and have it be really short, that could work out great. But like, you can't have basic last 128 days with no updates when the community had been conditioned to expect weekly updates for the first 2 years of the game.
Season X. By the time people became exhausted of the complexity that a Season 10 would have to offer, I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man. Epic could once again shift back towards something basic as a bit of a refresher. It would create a level of
Fortnite OG, we just had that, and it was incredibly successful, but it was very short. If the OG season was 3 months long, people would have lost interest. I think having it be short and sweet, if it's going to be basic, works perfectly.
Contrast between seasons that current players look for today, while still building up towards some kind of finality similar to Chapter 1. I also think it's important to clarify that when I say basic and bare bones, I don't mean lacking in the amount of content.
Legitimately, the only update for 120 days.
Clarify that when I say basic and bare bones, I don't mean
was the harpoon. They also added lightsabers at one point. Because Star Wars, I think the lightsabers and the E11s got added for the first time in Chapter 2 Season 1. This was like a fishing rod. It was a harpoon. It would instant fish if you shot it at a fishing hole. Not a very exciting item.
Lacking in the amount of content.
It was useful,
we know
but
from
like,
the game's history that lacking...
This is what people did. This is what content creators did during Season 1 of Chapter 2 because there was just no content in the game. I hope he plays it.
Frequent updates throughout a season can be very damaging to the perception of it, regardless of the quality that the loot pool and map present.
Hey, what's up guys? I have a very special video for you guys today. I entered the Fortnite Fashion Show World Cup.
I feel like a lot of people hear basic
Fashion shows
or less complicated, and they think what I'm implying is an unchanging static experience, when that's just not the case at all. I'm not even attempting to argue that more complexity in mechanics or items is inherently a bad thing, and that's why I'm suggesting this form factor of a slow build-up filled with good content to support each season. It helps remind people that sometimes it's interesting to switch things up from a basic approach, but it's also refreshing to slow things down. In addition to this, the way Epic tackles their year-long chapters seems to be very representative of a quantity over quality issue that I've discussed in the past.
Okay, yeah. We'll let him talk.
Problem is, most new seasons introduce so much content now that it's just inevitable that under these time constraints and massive expectations that the content is executed poorly or at the very least unbalanced. But what is exemplified with this season is Epic's desire to create more map changes per season if it means their chapters are going to be shorter. This sounds great, but it very likely contributes to the recession of quantity and quality of content, because now Epic has to expend more resources to create a new map every year, and more reworks to those maps per season. At the end of the day, a year-long model presents a plethora of issues, at least when trying to uphold consistency. This doesn't make it the worst option for structure of a
So I don't think he's going to talk about what I wanted to say. I thought he was going to say that, like, this video has been mostly about the map changing every year. One of the things that I think is bad for new chapters and having to make a new chapter every year is I think it's a lot easier to make a map than it is new mechanics. And, like, I feel like they're running out of mechanics because like for each chapter they want there to be like distinctly different mechanics. Chapter 3 we had a lot of movement added with like sprinting, mantling, sliding. Chapter 4 we had like augments and the mid-match objectives. And then chapter 5 we've had medallions and like weapon attachments. Like each chapter, not only do you think of it in terms of the map, but also like the mechanics it added. There's a lot of people who started playing in chapter 4 who think of augments, and that's like something they remember fondly. Like medallions and attachments will be the same way for chapter 5, but like I don't know how much they're gonna just keep being able to pull new mechanics like that out of their hat, you know? Like what do they do next? I feel like it's much easier to be like, all right, we'll make some new neighborhoods and a new map. Like we've seen games for years kind of make new maps every year, and it's like no big deal. But like having new groundbreaking mechanics to like make the chapter look flashy in a trailer, like I don't know what they can keep doing.
Chapter.
And I feel like trying to force that is so much more negative than like anything else.
But it does lack many aspects of the 2-year model that simply worked better. But the question still stands, are Fortnite chapters too short? Honestly, my perspective on this topic seems to vary quite a bit because the time lengths for chapters isn't something that is completely black and white. There's not really a best way of approaching a decision like this, but I think it's important to understand the benefits from both and take what works from them to apply it to future chapters. In a hypothetical scenario, it might be interesting to see chapters that vary in length depending upon the direction of the game's story.
I agree. I think the biggest thing about yearly chapters that I don't like is that we know it's going to be a year long. If there was some mystery to it, I think that would make it a lot more exciting to pay attention to the game. Because like you guys know this, right now we're at the end of a season. It's less exciting to play the game right now, and like you probably don't care as much about playing the game because you know it's going to change in a few days. I feel like that problem is even worse when we're at the end of a chapter. But it's also better in a way in the sense that like it's your last time to enjoy the map. But like I feel like it being yearly and knowing it's yearly does kind of like contribute to burnout in like the back half of the year or the midway through the year.
For example, if whatever the creative director decides to build towards takes longer than expected, maybe we see a chapter that featured a length of a year and a half, or if they wanted to create a twist or abrupt end to a chapter, they could make it as short as a couple months. This would create more excitement surrounding the story and live events because rather than a certain formula dictating the outcome of a season,
Live events have just been terrible. The last decent live event was Collision. Fracture was horrible, and Big Bang was an ad. I think the mini event we had this year with like the lightning striking Pandora's box was significantly more exciting to me than either of those live events were, and it was just like over in 30 seconds.
season's event, there's a chance that if, for example, the device in the Chapter 3 Season 2 event succeeded, we would only have a 2-season chapter, ultimately making events more consequential in the grand scheme of the game's direction. However, none of this is really anything Epic would likely ever consider, and that's why I say hypothetical, because the game's very formulaic nature is why we have year-long chapters in the first place, and why the game's story was dumped in the trash in favor of promotional strategies and the metaverse.
I think the metaverse was the nail in the coffin for the storyline, not as much yearly chapters, based on what Donald Mustard has said. He didn't really mention yearly chapters at all.
Year-long chapters are the far easier approach for Epic if they want to keep players interested,
it's very
regardless
safe.
of the quality of content.
No matter how you feel about the game right now, next season might be your least favorite season ever, right? Let's say Chapter 5 Season 3, you hate it. You don't enjoy playing it. I feel like you're less likely to completely quit the game if you know a new map is in like a few months. Because we got Season 3 this week. Season 4, I don't know when it starts. I think September. Or maybe late August. And then OG in November. And then and then Chapter 6 in December. Like, we're so close to so much content. And that happens every year. It's just like so safe for the game, and I think leads to so many people coming back to the game. Just based on reading comments and interacting with the community, I think the yearly model does really work. And I would rather have chapters be too short than too long, personally. Same with seasons. I would much rather a season be too short than too long. Yeah, but like I said, I did play COD back in the day a lot, like COD 4 to Call of Duty World War II. I played each of those games, and I was max prestige in each of them. Like, I played a good amount. And the fact that it was a yearly release, people would knock that, but it was like it was like why I enjoyed the franchise so much. New maps, new guns, new mechanics every year. Like, by the time I like despise the old one, there's a new one out already. Or by the time we're getting burnt out of the current one, like leaks and news and hype is starting to build for the next one. And Call of Duty has been around as far as like being big and popular, I feel like COD 4 onward, that's like almost 20 years at this point. Like the yearly model works for sure. But let me know what you guys think of it. I guess we'll let it finish.
And 2-year chapters or longer chapters are likely going to remain a relic of the past due to Epic's closed-minded approach. Let me know what time length you prefer down in the comments below, and consider subscribing or checking out my other content if you made it this far. Anyways, thank you for watching and have a great day.
Yeah, okay. So I would rather have yearly than 2 years. Or like I said, I'd just rather have it be too short than too long. I would like to see how 1.5 year goes. I'd be interested to see what would happen there. And it would kind of like alternate when the new one comes out rather than having it be every December. I think they do like that it's every December though, or just like a set time period for a new chapter. That way people associate that time period with Fortnite and a new Fortnite chapter in the same way I was talking about with COD. If you're a COD player, you kind of associate fall time with the new game probably. I know I do, and I know a lot of my friends do that like played COD a lot back in those days. And so you didn't even have to think like, is there a new COD coming out, because you already know it is because it happens every year. I think that's a huge plus, and just in terms of like keeping the player base happy, keeping people come back to the game. I don't think they're going to change it, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this. His channel will be linked down in the description. Like I said, his videos are very good, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.